Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to McLaren Vale, Australia, and we're looking at the Brash Higgins 2018 Clos Antonio Lamento Cabernet Franc. Brash Higgins is a partnership between Brad Hickey, a Chicago native and former sommelier, and Nicole Thorpe, a McLaren Vale native whose family have been farming vines in the region for many generations. The couple met back in 2007, and the first Brash Higgins release was 2011, which was their first bottling of Nero d'Avola, a grape that has now become a signature for the winery. I first discovered Brad and Brash Higgins through an interview that Brad did with Levi Dalton back in 2016 as part of Levi Dalton's I'll Drink to That podcast. During that episode, I recall at one point that Brad mentioned that he made a 100% Cabernet Franc, and I was immediately like, I need to find this wine. In 2017, I had a chance to meet Brad when he did an in-store tasting at Wolf's Wine Shop, which was my local wine shop when I lived in Coral Gables, Florida. And during that tasting, I naturally asked Brad about Franc, and I was delighted to find out that there was a small allocation of bottles that were on the water as part of a shipment bound for the US. Later that year, I had a chance to purchase and try my first Brash Higgins Franc, and I was immediately smitten with this wine. It had a sense of place, character, balance, and energy, and really it sparked my curiosity to learn more about Brad, his passion for Cabernet Franc, as well as this vineyard. Now, it is often the case that when a winemaker chooses to work with Cabernet Franc, it's because they've discovered and fallen in love with the expressions of Cabernet Franc from the Loire Valley. And it's just a matter of time for them to find the right vineyard or site that really makes an expression of Cabernet Franc that speaks to their soul. And this is really what happened for Brad. He discovered this block back in 2014, and that was the first release of Franc, and he has not looked back since. So today's wine is taking us to the McLaren Vale region in Australia. And McLaren Vale is part of the Fluria zone, which is one of 7 zones that make up the South Australia region. And McLaren Vale is situated down the southern coast of South Australia. We're about 30 kilometers or so south of the city of Adelaide, and we're bordered to the east by the Mount Lofty Ranges, and we're bordered to the west by the Gulf of St. Vincent. Now, of course, us wine professionals know that Australia is Shiraz country, and Cabernet Franc represents a very small piece of the overall viticulture and wine landscape here. There are currently around 124 hectares of Cabernet Franc planted in the South Australia region, and compare that to the 27,443 hectares of Shiraz planted here. Yep, Cabernet Franc is a really small piece of the picture. In McLaren Vale specifically, there are 22 hectares of Cabernet Franc planted, and compare that to the 4,198 hectares of Shiraz planted. And in terms of McLaren Vale within the South Australia region, it actually ranks 3rd in terms of Cabernet Franc plantings, behind Coonawarra and the Barossa Valley. So the microclimate of the McLaren Vale region can be characterized as Mediterranean. So we have warm to hot summers, mild winters, and very low rainfall. The region is quite large. There's about 7,200 hectares under vine here, and there is quite a bit of variability from vineyard to vineyard within the region. But there's one major moderating influence that comes into play here, and this is wind. And there's actually 2 kinds of wind that help to cool and moderate the conditions here. We have cool breezes that come off of the Gulf of St. Vincent, which is part of the Southern Ocean. And then we have cooling breezes that come down from the Mount Lofty Ranges. And your proximity to these influences really dictate the mesoclimate of your vineyard. Now, in terms of this region in general, it is really, honestly, too warm for all things considered for Cabernet Franc. But there are a couple important moderating factors that come into play for this particular block. So the vineyard itself is located about 6.5 kilometers east of the Gulf of St. Vincent. So we're very close to this large body of water. So the vineyard does receive these cooling breezes during the daytime, which helps to drop the overall vineyard temperature. And then because we're so close to this body of water, in the evening, the temperature drops quite a bit. So it cools down. We have a wider diurnal range in temperatures. And this will, of course, help to slow down ripening and preserve acidities. In addition to that, there is one other very important factor that comes into play with this particular vineyard and this block of Cabernet Franc, and this is the soils. Now, the soils of the McLaren Vale region are some of the most diverse and complex in all of Australia. A number of geological studies have been done on the soils, and for the nerds out there, the McLaren Vale Wine Region Trade website has some incredible resources that get into the real nitty-gritty of these soils from a geology perspective. But this block in this vineyard for Cabernet Franc, the soils here are known locally as cracking black clay. And this is a type of vertisol, which is this very heavy, dense, expansive clay. And it's typically of volcanic origin. And this clay, like all clays, is a cooler soil, which of course we're getting, again, a nice cooler environment for Cabernet Franc. And while this clay does have a very high water holding capacity, the pore size of this clay is super, super small. And that means that the vine has to work really, really hard to access that water. And this naturally restricts vine vigor as well as yield, creating a natural balance in the vine. And both Brad Hickey as well as viticulturalist Peter Bolt indicated to me that this cracking black clay is really critical to the success of Cabernet Franc in this particular site and does contribute to the character in the finished wine. The block itself is around 4 acres. That's about 1.6 hectares of Cabernet Franc. And the Cabernet Franc vines were planted in 2001. And these are actually own-rooted Cabernet Franc vines, which is super cool. And the rows are oriented north-south. And there is careful management of the canopy on the western side to ensure that the bunches are shaded from the stronger afternoon sunshine as well. So there's a lot of factors here that make this a happy place for Cabernet Franc. We have cooler clay soils, we have cooling breezes, a wider diurnal range in temperatures, and then again we have precise canopy management to help to ensure shading so that the Cabernet Franc bunches don't get overripe or sunburned. And from a winemaking perspective, Brad is very careful as it relates to his picking decisions. So he wants to ensure that Cabernet Franc retains its Cabernet Franc-ness. So Brad will pick based on acidities and pH rather than sugars. So typically Brad would be picking, we'll say in bricks, around 22, 23 or so bricks, versus the big guys that would pick Cabernet Franc around 25 plus bricks. So this is one of the important decisions that come into play with this wine. So the fruit itself is hand harvested and it is destemmed, and fermentation takes place in open top 1 ton fermenters, and fermentation is with indigenous yeast, and the fermentation temperature sits at around 24 to 26 or so degrees Celsius. And Brad will come in and do punch downs twice daily during the active fermentation, and the wine stays on skins for about 2.5 or so weeks. And then Brad will drain off the free run wine and then very gently press the skins, and then he'll reassemble the free run wine as well as the pressed wine, and then the wine ages for about 10 or so months in 8 to 12-year-old French oak barrels. So let's get into this wine. So the nose on this wine is fantastic, and it really reminds me of previous vintages, so it is very similar in that way, and it has such a gorgeous perfume. The fruits are a little bit brooding. They come through a bit brambly. There's some darker fruits, some red fruits as well, on the sweeter side, of course. I'm getting like a lovely dark foresty berry. There's a bit of like a strawberry preserves note, which I really, really like. But the fruit is super fresh, which I think is really important to this wine. And the wine does lean a little bit more on the savory or earthy side. I love the profile of the pyrazines, and really they come through for me as eucalyptus. And I know that sounds typical because we always say eucalyptus with Australian reds, but there is a distinctive kind of eucalyptus note to this wine. And there also is these layers of woodsy herbs like a twiggy herb like rosemary, or even like something like marjoram. But I do love the perfume. And there is some spiciness on the nose as well, which I absolutely love. And for me, it comes through as like a paprika note, which is awesome. Now, in terms of the fruit profile on the palate, Comes through very similarly as it did on the nose. It's a little bit tartar on the palate, which is fantastic. That acidity is really bright and vibrant. So there's a bit more of like a pomegranate thing going on the palate. And the palate is also super spicy. Paprika comes through, then there's like the additional layers of like star anise as well as Szechuan peppercorns. There's also a little bit of like a cured black olive thing going on, which I really, really dig. Kind of gives that salty, briny kind of edge to this wine. The acidity, very energetic, balancing, fresh, and the tannins, they're a little bit on the denser side. There's a certain chew to the tannins, but they're very silky in the mouth. And then that chew comes in on the finish, which provides this, this sense of structure. And then the overall weight of this wine, it's about a medium body, very nicely balanced. And I do think that there is great play between the tannins and the acid as well as the fruit. And there is some juiciness to the palate as well, which is giving this ease and complementing those chewier tannins really, really nicely. This wine is so distinctive, so singular, and you know it's Cabernet Franc. Like there's no denying the varietal character here, but you do get a sense that this is coming from like a warmer microclimate, and it coming from someplace really special. You can sense that there is a really strong understanding of the vines and this plot and what really you should be doing in the cellar in order to kind of best express this site. And I think Brad nails it. Like this is not Loire. It's not, you know, this brooding, overripe example of Cabernet Franc. It is so true to grape. It is so true to place. And really, if there was anybody I could name as a flag bearer for this grape variety in Australia, it would absolutely be Brad Hickey. And his passion for this grape just exudes, it just oozes from this wine. And if you can find it, it's a tough one. Brad makes about 300 or so cases of this a year, so it is not an easy one to find. But if you do come across it, like this is like, just do it. Like buy this bottle because it's just such a singular expression, and you can just, like I said, you can feel Brad's passion just like in every single drop of this wine. If you have had the pleasure of trying the Brash Higgins Cabernet Franc, do let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. Or if you have had another single varietal Cabernet Franc from Australia that you absolutely love, tell me who the producer is and what you thought of that wine in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.